Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in January, and I have 6 books in total to talk about. Some ups and downs, but overall it was a good reading month. So the first 2 books that I decided to tackle were the last 2 books remaining on my 23 and 23 list that I didn't actually get to in 2023. So we've got Clive Barker's Sacrament and Crossbearers by Marc Brellen. So the first one I picked up was Sacrament by Clive Barker. This is a pretty big one. This edition is over 600 pages long, and it's one I've been meaning to read for ages, which is why I put it on my 23 and 23 list. And I buddy read this with my friend Jason over on Instagram. It was a reread for him and he very much enjoyed revisiting it. It was the first time reading it for me and I very much enjoyed reading it too. So this one is following a character, Will, who is a wildlife photographer, and he travels the world photographing species that are going extinct. And so yeah, pretty depressing stuff. And we follow him. He's in like his early 40s if I'm remembering correctly, and we also then take a look back at his childhood growing up in the north of England. And yeah, I won't go into too much detail there, but yeah, this is a bit of a meandering story. It does kind of jump around from different time periods. There are a few different characters that we get perspectives from, including this very mysterious couple who, I don't want to say too much about because it was, kind of a surprise for me to read about, so I feel like that's the best way to go into it. But they were very intriguing. Their whole story was, very interesting. And so basically we're following Will on this kind of journey of like remembering things from his past and things from his past that are now coming back into his present. Also, Will is a gay man, so that is a big element of the story, and this came out in the 90s, and from what I understand, this was the book where the author Clive Barker actually came out as gay as well. So a very important book of his career. And also this book does touch on the AIDS crisis of the time. There are definitely themes of death within the book, which I found were very effective and very poignant. This did make me cry a couple of times. Like I said, this is a bit of a meandering story, and I feel like that's probably going to work for some people and maybe not for others. I personally really enjoyed it just because I was so enthralled with the characters and his writing style. It did feel a bit disjointed overall, just because it does try to go in some different directions and kind of try to include a lot of different things going on, but I still loved it, so it's really not much of a criticism. There is also a religious or spiritual element to the story too, which, I feel like a lot of Barker's work does involve. I wouldn't call this a horror novel, but it does have some dark subject matter, and it does have some horror/fantasy elements to it within this very character focused story. So it's a bit of a hard one to really describe. I just went in not really knowing much of anything and thoroughly enjoyed it. So if anything of what I've said sounds interesting to you, then I would just say go for it and pick it up and give it a try. His writing really is so wonderful and so evocative. I just really enjoyed being immersed in this pretty epic 600 plus page novel. I rated this one 4.5 stars. It was an excellent choice to read as my first read of 2024. The second book that I picked up, and the last one on my 23 and 23, was Crossbearers by Marc Brellen, although the copyright page does have the name Bruce Freshman. So I couldn't really find anything about either name online, but I probably didn't do too much digging. But anyway, this originally came out in 1988, and it is, says on the spine, it's a leisure horror title, but I wouldn't call this horror. I would say it's more of a police procedural type story. It is set in New York City, and we're following a cop who is investigating a suspicious death, and then other specific people are being targeted, and the cop is receiving these phone calls from someone who is claiming to be dealing with these sinners. So there's this religious angle to the story, and I thought it was maybe an interesting concept, but it just wasn't particularly interesting to read. The characters were all a bit generic, and I did read the first couple of chapters, and the chapters were long, just so you know, but I just wasn't really grabbed by it, so I did skim the rest just in case it looked like it was going to pick up, but it didn't. It seemed like a pretty straightforward police procedural type story, and not really the horror that I was expecting or wanting, so I ended up DNFing this, but like I said, I did kind of skim through the whole thing, so I have a pretty decent idea of it, but I would consider it a DNF rather than me actually rating it. So, bit of a shame to end the 23 and 23 on that note, but so it goes. Okay, then I read Brainworms by Alison Rumfitt. This just came out, I think, towards the end of last year, and I was sent a copy by the publisher, so thank you to them. And I was very excited for this one. I had read her previous novel, Tell Me I'm Worthless, when that first came out, and thought it was excellent. So I was very much looking forward to reading more of her work, and unfortunately this was a bit of a letdown for me. It wasn't a bad book, I still ended up rating it 3 stars, but I wasn't as jazzed about it as I thought I was going to be. So this is mostly following 2 different characters who have their own kind of fetishes, and when these 2 characters come together, you know, things happen. So it does have quite a lot of sexual content and also some body horror. The body horror is what I was wanting from this book, and I mean, there was some of it, but it was just not that interesting, I didn't think. There are a couple of pretty disgusting scenes in here, but nothing that really, you know, stood out to me as particularly special or interesting. And it was just kind of funny because there are a couple of like trigger warnings in here that are, you know, preparing you for something so awful. And I'm like, well, yeah, that was gross, but that's, you know, if you're preparing me for something so bad, then I'm going to expect something really insane. And I don't think this was it. I feel like this didn't go far enough to be considered an extreme horror novel, but it also didn't really have enough substance behind it for me to really be like interested in it and get more out of it in that sense. So for me it didn't really lean enough in one direction or another. I found that it did tread some similar ground to her previous novel. So the main characters here are trans, and they are dealing with various forms of transphobia, and there is a look at the political landscape of the UK specifically, and I just felt it was touching on a lot of the same things as Tell Me I'm Worthless did, but the characters and the story itself weren't nearly as interesting to me as Tell Me I'm Worthless was. I feel like it relied too much on the sexual content and the gross content, and I don't think there was enough substance there to back it up. So I did leave this one feeling a bit disappointed. There were still things I liked about it, and I ended up giving it 3 stars overall, but I was a bit underwhelmed in comparison to Tell Me I'm Worthless. Okay, then I picked up a point horror book. This one was The Bride by D.E. Athkins, the best pen name ever, and this was a really fun one. So this is about a teenage girl, of course. She is invited to her cousin's wedding. Her cousin is called Blaine, and she's this gorgeous model and, you know, leads a very glamorous lifestyle. And she's getting married to the wealthy, handsome Preston. So there's a ton of people invited to this fairy tale wedding at this, particular venue. But there are rumours that the place is haunted by a bride who, had come to some untimely demise. And as things go on with the wedding rehearsal, etc., some strange things start to happen, and so yeah, is the place actually haunted? Is it the bride come back to wreak her revenge, or is there something else going on? So yeah, I just thought this one was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed all of the different models here. There's a lot of like bitchiness going on between them, which was just a lot of fun to read about. And then we have our main character who is just, yeah, thrown into this mix that she's kind of a bit out of her comfort zone, but is, you know, is still excited to be there. And of course she has a bit of a love interest as well. So this was just a fun read. I enjoyed the different setting. It's, you know, not the typical setting that I've read in a point horror book, so I enjoyed that, and it was just an entertaining read. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And then I picked up a non-fiction book. This is Ghostland, In Search of a Haunted Country by Edward Parnell. This is another big one. This is over 400 pages long. It came out a few years ago, and it's one I'd been curious to read, and I actually just got a copy of this for Christmas from my mum, so thank you, Mum. And I, yeah, just really wanted to dive into it sooner rather than later. So this is kind of an interesting one. The back describes it as part memoir, part travelogue. So I think that, yeah, describes it pretty well. And basically we kind of go around the country learning about different authors of, you know, ghost stories, etc., like M.R. James, and also films that have been, yeah, filmed in the UK, like The Wicker Man. A lot of these just very British products, and how they relate to the country and how maybe the country inspired them, and then also just, yeah, his memories of, you know, absorbing these things as he was growing up. And also he does discuss how he, yeah, has lost some of his family members over the years. So there is an element of death and grief to this book as well. And I'm not gonna lie, this set me off on like a proper downward spiral that I spent some dark times having to deal with, because yeah, having you know, been through my own experiences, yeah, this just brought up some stuff. And while I did expect that as a possibility, knowing, you know, what this was about, I didn't expect it to hit me so hard, but it did. Right now I'm feeling in an okay place, so we're okay, and I can talk about it. I can talk about the book at least. But yeah, this was just really interesting. I will say it did take me a little bit to get into it, because it does kind of jump around a bit. You know, sometimes he'll be talking about his own personal experiences and memories, and then the next he'll be talking about a specific author and, you know, a bit of biography and talking about some of their specific works. And then it'll just kind of jump around, and sometimes I would just have a hard time figuring out what we were dealing with, what he was referring to, and I'd maybe have to reread certain bits. That might just be down to me rather than his writing style, but yeah, it just did take me a little bit of time to get into the kind of disjointed nature of what the book is, just because it is trying to do more than one thing at once. But overall, I did find this to be a really interesting read. Yeah, there are definitely some things in here that, you know, I experienced during my childhood too, you know, different stories and films and stuff, and, you know, places as well, which, you know, was very, yeah, evocative to me, and, yeah, brought up a lot of my own memories, good and bad. And funnily enough, we actually grew up in the same county of England. We both grew up in Lincolnshire, so there was definitely a lot of familiar places that he talks about, yeah, referring to his own childhood and experiences. So that was really interesting. And yeah, there are definitely plenty of stories and films, etc., that I have not yet seen or read that I would really like to. So I do need to go back through this and make a list of things I need to read and watch. So overall, this was a really interesting read, both for the kind of trip around the UK and yeah, discussing various authors, etc., and their work, and also, yeah, just the personal memoir of the author. Yeah, I thought it was a really good read, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. And then last up I read a graphic novel which was called Tender by Beth Hetland. And I actually got a copy of this through NetGalley. I don't use NetGalley a lot, but every once in a while I'll have a scroll through and see if there's anything that looks interesting. And yeah, this one kind of piqued my curiosity, so I decided to give it a try. And the fact that it said it was a body horror related story, I was like, count me in. So this is about a woman who sees all these people around her, you know, getting engaged, getting married, having kids, and she wants the same things, but she just hasn't found the right person, and she becomes obsessed with making it happen. So she kind of, yeah, orchestrates things to force it. But as you can probably imagine, forcing it doesn't actually give her the dream life she wanted, and things go horribly wrong, and yeah, things start to fall apart. So I thought this was an interesting concept. I think unfortunately the story, because a lot of it is trying to relay her kind of humdrum life and what she is, you know, wanting to escape from, but that just didn't make for a particularly interesting reading experience, because we're just dealing with the kind of repetitive nature of her days. And while the story does tackle, you know, an interesting concept, I don't know if it was particularly well done. I felt like everything was very surface level, and we didn't really get to know this character beyond these kind of very surface level elements. So I think when things did start to break down for her, I just didn't really care that much, which is a shame. Another negative for me, unfortunately, was I wasn't a huge fan of the illustration style. It wasn't bad, I just, yeah, I wasn't like super into it. One of the positives for me though was that it does contain some dream sequences, and I thought those were really, really cool, really well done. Yeah, definitely conveyed that weirdness of dreams and how they can just be so random and disturbing as well. So I really did like those little segments that, you know, a few of them happened throughout the story. And the body horror aspect was just a bit, you know, it's just something that's been done before. It just wasn't particularly unique or interesting. And again, because I didn't really feel that much for the character, you know, I wasn't really invested in the horrible things that might happen. So yeah, I commend the effort. You know, I like the idea, I just wasn't like super jazzed about the execution. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. So that was everything I read in January. Like I said, some ups and downs, but overall not a bad month, and yeah, definitely pretty cool to kick the new year off with a 4.5 star book already. Let me know if you've read any of these, I would love to hear your thoughts, and yeah, tell me what you've been reading. If you had any standout books in January, I would love to hear about them. Thank you ever so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!